The Ivan Vasili was not a typical cursed or jinxed ship. There was nothing unusual or spectacular about her. She was built in St. Petersburg in 1897 to transport freight across the Baltic Sea to the Gulf of Finland and was driven by a single triple expansion steam engine. Her bunkers carried enough coal to take her 2,500 miles at the speed of 8 knots. She was made of riveted iron plates, while her deck and superstructure were wood. She had a record of reliability and stability, to the point of being boring, really. Nothing magnificent about this ship whatsoever. No mishaps took place on her during the first 5 years that she plied the sea. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed overnight, and she became a sailor's worst nightmare of calamity and death. In 1903, when the Russian government prepared for war with Japan, the Ivan Vasili's role changed overnight. Was ordered to carry a cargo of war materials to Vladivostok in advance of the Russian warships. The steamer cut through the North Sea, the Atlantic, and south along the west coast of Africa, calling in Cape Town. Then she moved north along the east coast of Africa and Zanzibar, topping off her bunkers and taking on extra sacks of coal for the up-and-coming leg across the Indian Ocean. However, soon the nightmare would begin when the crew realised that somewhere along the route they'd taken on more than just coal. Everything was business as usual as the ship left the port and took to the sea. But the crew suddenly felt that a presence was on board. Something just didn't feel right. No one knew exactly what it was, but everyone was certain that an invisible entity was among them. When it was near, the men felt something was watching them, and they would feel a sudden chill in the air. This type of haunting went on for a few days before the danger of the situation heightened and the entity began extracting an alarming toll on the crew. One night before the change of watch, the men on deck saw an apparition. It is said it looked human, but its features were impossible to make out. It was misty, glowing, and luminous as it strolled across the deck, and then out of nowhere just disappeared again behind the lifeboat. The men were understandably shocked. Still, nothing remarkable happened until the ship reached the Port Arthur military base in China, where the crew intended to refuel the ship. On the night before the ship entered port, a crew member suddenly let loose with a horrifying scream that sent everyone into a panic. The crew literally went berserk and a wild melee ensued, the men having no idea what they were doing as they beat each other and themselves. This episode ended with Seaman Alec Govinsky hurling himself into the murky black waves to his death. Afterward, the men collapsed to the deck and everything returned to normal. The ship resumed its journey to Vladivostok, and the crew was relieved when nothing unusual happened during the first and second day at sea. But then all hell broke loose again. On the third day, the crew went on a screaming and fighting hysterical rampage. A few minutes later, they collapsed on deck like before, only to learn that another shipmate had thrown himself overboard to his death. When the ship finally reached Vladivostok, 12 crew members abandoned ship. They were so afraid of whatever was aboard the vessel, they couldn't get away from it fast enough. Some had even attempted to escape before the cargo hatches were even opened. Unfortunately for them, they were quickly rounded up like cattle and returned to the vessel, where they were kept under armed surveillance. The anxiety on the ship must have been high as the cargo was unloaded. Nevertheless, the Ivan Vasili was put to sea again on a voyage south to Hong Kong. In no time, this leg of the trip erupted into yet another nightmare. Another hysterical frenzy occurred, and another crew member killed himself. The next night, a repeat performance occurred, resulting in another crew member's death. During the third episode, a stoker reportedly died of fear. Then, just as the ship reached the port of Hong Kong, Captain Sven Adrist flung himself overboard and drowned. This time, nothing could stop the crew members from deserting. When the ship docked, the entire crew, except Second Officer Chris Hansen and 5 Scandinavian seamen, fled. Either dedicated to duty or unfazed by the tragedies, Hansen took over as captain and hired a new crew for the ship, and the steamer set out again, this time towards Sydney, Australia, to pick up a cargo of wool. To Hanson's relief, the voyage south was uneventful. That was until just before they reached Sydney. Then Hanson suddenly had the urge to, well, kill himself. He took out his revolver and shot himself to death. In Sydney, even before the dock lines were secure, the crew started abandoning the ship, all except boatswain Harry Nelson. Nelson set about finding another captain, one who didn't believe in ghosts or superstitions. And he found his man, but it took 4 months to find another crew. By then, word had gotten around, and no sailor in his right mind wanted to sail what was then regarded as the death ship. The steamer was put to sea again, its destination San Francisco. The trip went smoother until a week later, when the crew was set into a screaming and melee again. This time, 2 seamen went completely mad and had to be confined below decks. In the morning, they were both found dead. The next day, the new and skeptical captain put a revolver to his mouth and pulled the trigger. Following the latest round of tragedy, the crew, including Nelson, refused to continue with the voyage, and they turned the vessel around with the intent to return to Vladivostok. When the Ivan Vasili arrived in the Russian city, the entire crew, including Nelson, walked off the ship. The men were offered rewards, incentives, and all kinds of bonuses for returning to the ship, but nothing would convince them to get back on the vessel. Not one of them wanted any part of that ship. No other sailor did either. Watchmen were unwilling to even get close to her, much less than spend the night on board her. And so the diabolical vessel sat in port, abandoned for many years. Ultimately, the sailors of the Vladivostok decided that fire was the only way to destroy the evil entity that haunted the ship. And so in the winter of 1907, on a clear and starry night, they set the vessel aflame. In dozens of small boats, they watched, cheering as the flames devoured the ship. Some even sang as the fiery bridge engulfed the ship. They cheered its demise, toasted the occasion with vodka as the iron skin buckled. Cast off from her moorings, she was dragged out to sea by a tugboat. She still smouldered the next day and began rolling to starboard until she flipped over on her side and started to slide beneath the water. Those who watched swore that before the ship went under, an eerie scream emanated from the hull. The case of the Bannockburn ghost ship. The steamship Banicburn was a Canadian steel-hulled freighter which disappeared on Lake Superior in snowy weather on November the 21st, 1902. Now on that day she was spotted by a captain of a passing vessel around noon of that same day, and minutes later when the captain looked again, the ship seemed to have just vanished, just disappeared. It wouldn't have been more than 5 minutes of time that had passed and the ship had completely vanished. Now when the next day came and the ship hadn't made port where she was supposed to go, it was just assumed that due to the bad weather the day before, she was running late, or she'd anchored somewhere to stay safe, or she'd hidden behind one of the islands in order to try and get out some of the weather. So nothing was too alarming at this time. But as time passed and the days passed, more concern grew. On the 25th of November 1902, the steamship John D. Rockefeller passed through a debris field just off Standard Rock. No other ship was missing, and there was no indication of what had happened. So some believe it was to do with the Bannockburn. On the 30th of November of the same year, the Bannockburn and her crew were officially declared lost. Just no one knew where they'd gone. On December the 12th of the same year, a life jacket and an oar washed up on one of the shores of the island that belonged to the Bannockburn, deepening the mystery more. As always, there's been many theories around this. There's been many ideas of what could have happened to the Bannockburn, from exploding boilers to a paranormal or a supernatural explanation. But the mystery behind this is the stories that come after the disappearance of the Bannockburn. Now, you got to bear in mind that the Banicburn, for its time, was a very unusual ship to have doing that kind of run on the Great Lakes. It was a very unusual ship. It didn't look like the other ships you would get on the Great Lakes. It was a very unique style. The minute a captain saw the Bannockburn, they knew it was the Bannockburn. It was unmistakably, you could not mistake what it were or what ship it was. Now, the Bannockburn is not the first ship to just seemingly disappear and then to be sighted afterwards. Submarine sailors have reportedly sighted the USS Scorpion long after the ship sank southwest of the Azores. The USS Scorpion, however, was one of 6 sister ships that looked identical to each other. So it's more than likely it was one of the other 6 sister ships that people saw and they mistook it for the USS Scorpion. In this case, however, that is not the case, as the Bannockburn was unique with how it looked on that stretch of water. It was unique. No other ship looked like it. None whatsoever. Now, when I was digging through the research on this and I was going into it and finding more and more stories, one that really fascinated me was one that involved the ship, the Walter A. Hutchinson. Now, this I found really fascinating. The story goes, shortly after World War II, the Walter A. Hutchinson was headed to the Salt Locks in the Great Lakes in a storm. 11 hours out of Thunder Bay, the crew knew they were close to the shore but had no idea to tell exactly how close. They had been running close to the shore, but with the loss of their electronics due to the ice, they did not know how close to the shore exactly. The wind was coming out of the northwest and would have been pushing the Walter A. Hutchinson closer to the shore, but they might not have known that at the time. They could steer a course more to the north, but this would put the seas on the side of the ship and could cause the cargo to shift and capsize the ship. So this risk wasn't taken at the time. So the captain continued on his course and preferring the risk possibly running aground to a likely capsizing had he changed course. The Banicburn, however, had been sighted on a parallel course, but with the coming night, they had lost sight of her. Suddenly, a rocket exploded in the night. The crew saw the Banicburn 100 yards off coming straight at them. There was no mistaking what they saw. The captain ordered the rudder about over hard to port, bringing the bow around to the northeast. The Walter A. Hutchinson wallowed in the high waves, trying to put distance between itself and the Banicburn to avoid a crash. After what seemed like probably an eternity for the crew, the Banicburn passed safely astern of the Walter A. Hutchinson. The crew continued to watch the Banicburn. Then ran aground and began to rip apart at the seams. Then the Banicburn simply disappeared. If the Walter A. Hutchinson had not changed course, she would have been the ship impaled on the rocks. So, did the Banicburn appear to warn the captain of the rocks ahead? What do you think? Because for me, that's a fascinating story. Had this crew not seen the Banicburn coming straight towards them and desperately move out of the way so they didn't collide with one, that ship would have hit the rocks, which is a spooky thought, to say the least. But what do you think? What do you make of that?